And if there is some instrument around, such as a microphone attached to a tape recorder, there will be noise. There will be vibration.
Here we go.
There will be light.
Turn that down. Hey everybody, here giving it a shot again. All set up here. Tonight we just have myself for most of it. Matt is with us on the stream and is going to join us a little bit later through either joining on screen or just I'm going to give him a call for a couple of questions. So it's great to have Matt with us again. For those of you who are new to this, I am Matt, or I call Professor Matt, and this is us taking you through our Staying Human and Staying Ahead series of leadership development programs, specifically with the 6 different chapters we have that you see behind me. Work is Broken, School Maybe Too, My 4 Dream Jobs, A. Oppenheimer, and the Rise of Human Insight. Today's episode, HRMAGEDDON, which is all about 3 huge crises, 5 confronting questions, and a new purpose for human resources. Advantage Human, which is all about human insight, flow state, and hospitality. And then Project Noise, which is about what we're going to do to try and create a new way of earning and learning, given all the challenges that we're facing today. I'll continue to work my way through the technology. I know there's easier ways. I'm just playing with it for now, and we'll get better and better each time. Can try and share a couple of videos today as well. One on the 4th turning, which is you can see I have the book here behind me. I think this is probably the most important book for people who are thinking about what the future might look like, thinking about careers. To read and understand. It's written by a historian, and the punchline is basically we're in a predictable cycle of this crisis that we're in. It's probably going to last till 2030, but after 2030, there's going to be incredible opportunity out there for those who can understand what we're going through. So the world's really fucked up right now. Historically speaking, it's difficult for everybody to get their head wrapped around. This can help us a little bit. So I'll play a video to summarize that for us, and I'll pick that up. But for most of today's stream, I want to dial in on human resources. And okay, stay there. I want to dial in on human resources, and specifically for a couple of reasons. First and foremost, this channel is primarily for students or younger humans who are thinking about the future and interested in this content for what it could mean for the rest of your career. And human resources has an incredible role in finding jobs, in selecting who should be hired, who should be promoted. And I think it's important that you understand how HR works. So that'd be one reason. The other reason that I have is I am starting a different channel or playlist, if you will, that will speak more to a corporate audience, or to the CEOs, the chief human resources officers, business managers who deal with talent every single day. And whether they're good at it or not good at it makes all the difference. So I just want to start to share some of the things that I've written and some of the thoughts that I've had over the last couple of years about human resources. And this will be my first dry run through presenting it or streaming it at least. So I just want to get a little bit comfortable with that before I do take it to the corporate audience in the next week or so. So I think that's the majority of what I want to do. Later, let me just get a couple more of my technology pieces set up here. I want to go here for a sec. Hey, Matt, why don't you, oh, that's not where I wanted to go. Great. Great. And I just want to fix lighting for 1 second. All right, that's good enough. So let me get us started here. So just to, again, in summary, going to talk mainly about HR today. Primarily to the audience I'm speaking to today are students or other young humans getting ready for the workplace and wanting to share, kind of an insider's guide from a guy who spent 25 years hiring people, developing training programs, being an executive coach, and kind of give you some insight to how it works today, the change it's going to go through over the next 5-6 years, and ideally equip you with some ideas and skills for how you can do better in job interviews, do better managing your own career. If you aspire to be a leader, I'll be talking a little bit about that as well and how you get into leadership roles. We'll talk a little bit about what jobs in the future I think will be safer from AI or not AI. We'll speak about a number of pieces. And let me just adjust this too. Get a little better frame there. Okay, I think that's better. So let's go ahead and get started. Now, the first thing I should do is probably just give a bit of a highlight on my background in human resources. I didn't think I was going into human resources career at all. As a matter of fact, I was heading for a sales career. I started in a large organization in my 4 dream jobs. In the part of that where we talk about Mr. Fairmont is when I moved to Fairmont Hotels and started working in food and beverage. And I managed, I was assistant manager of a restaurant and a bar at one of those hotels. And I ended up going through some training programs myself. And this amazing corporate trainer, a guy by the name of Sean Billing, who became a great friend and a fabulous mentor. He was the facilitator who would come in and deliver these training programs. And I'd never seen anything like that. I didn't realize that after you got out of university, or in my case, after you dropped out of university, there were still people who were providing educational opportunities or conducting classroom style training in the workplace. So I had several of these programs with Sean, and they were just amazing. Some would deal with service, some of them would deal with innovation, using empathy, how to have difficult conversations with an employee. If you're going to need to sit down and coach somebody, or eventually fire somebody, how do you do that in a way that's going to not destroy the relationship between the two of you, or wreck the reputation of the company once you do decide to fire the person. And it really changed my career. I thought, okay, instead of doing sales, I think I like this idea of trying to share thoughts about how people and organizations can be better. So I wanted to get into human resources, specifically the learning and development side of it. And that was tough because I was in food and beverage, and people in human resources typically were looking for people who had experience in human resources. And that's actually maybe the biggest challenge with HR today, particularly for people who are looking for jobs, is we're screening and filtering, and we have the algorithm set for who has the experience. And that just makes no sense to me, because you're like you never perform better at a job than when you're new at it. And you're qualified, and you've been chosen because of your talents, and there's a learning curve for you, but there's resources around you, and people are never more motivated than when they step up into a new job. And when you're taking somebody who already has the experience, well, they're moving laterally for some reason, and often the best and the brightest don't do that. Maybe you get lucky because somebody changed locations, or has some other reason why they're making that move. But at any rate, I didn't have the experience. We'll get more into that later about the curse of experience and the myth of experience when we talk about how recruiting works later. But I was determined that I was going to get this job to do basically corporate training, and I was prepared to move anywhere in the world to do it. So I actually had to apply to be a training manager at 5 different Fairmont hotels. The first couple were in the Caribbean somewhere. There was one in Toronto. There was a couple in the Rocky Mountains, and it was over about a 6-month period. And I guess I finally wore them down, and I got turned down. No problem. I'm gonna get it. Learn a little more, network a little more, get to know some more people. Keep doing a great job in the food and beverage areas. The assistant manager of the bar. And then finally, at the Chateau Lake Louise in Lake Louise, Alberta, Canada, they needed a training manager. And it's a pretty isolated post. So I don't know, either I finally wore them down, or they were desperate enough that they chose me to go there. And it was absolutely an amazing experience, because at that time in Chateau Lake Louise, in the summertime, it's 100% full all of the time. People coming from the United States, people coming from Asia, people coming from everywhere, and it's always full. And we needed about 700 employees to manage the place, or to operate the place. But turnover was so high, we ended up having to hire about 1,200. Right, our turnover was like 140%. So we ended up having to hire 1,200 people every single year. A huge number of them students, from across Canada, and some internationally. Again, we're in Guelph, so shout out to Guelph. There was the HAFA program, Hospitality and Food Administration program at the University of Guelph. Back in those days, we're talking early 2000s. And it was one of the world's best hospitality programs there were. There were 2 schools in Switzerland that maybe competed with it, one called Lyon, the other one called Lausanne. Lausanne. And then Cornell had a good hospitality program, but Guelph had, one of the top 4 hospitality programs in the world. So we'd bring about 100 students per year from Guelph, and then lots of other areas, for a total of like 250 students we'd have every year. But what was really cool about working in an environment like that, where you would need 1,200 people, and people were always turning over, was it was a training factory and a hiring factory. So my entire job would be, half my time just interviewing people, trying to match them for jobs, offering jobs to people, and then the other half of the time delivering the training programs when we received them there. So I would train hundreds and hundreds of people every month, and in the springtime, every single week, as we would get ramped up for the summer. So that was the perspective that I had on HR. And that eventually allowed me to grow into a corporate role in Toronto. And then eventually I turned that into moving over to Dubai as the Fairmont brand started to grow around the world. Of course, we needed training, we needed more people to do that. So a few weeks after September 11th, I raised my hand and said, I will go to Dubai, and didn't even know where it was, frankly. But wanted to train, wanted to see the world, so did that. And I ended up going back and forth between Toronto and Dubai a few times, and ended up having 2 parts of human resources underneath my role mandate. Always, for 17 years, I always had the training and leadership development and talent management piece. But for a few years, I also at the same time held the more traditional HR pieces. So things like compensation, benefits, employee relations, administration. The whole piece in Dubai was housing. But I'd wear kind of two hats. This piece of what I'm really passionate about, and where I think the best and highest use of my talents are, which is training. But then I would also do the more tactical, practical human resources stuff too. But I just didn't enjoy that quite as much. But the critiques and comments and ideas I share today come from a great deal of experience and background, starting all the way back there. And in that other chapter, I explain how I, all the experiences I had there, and then how I converted that to go work for a $300 billion investment firm, and I call it moving from housekeeper to hedge fund. But that's the perspective that I bring. There are parts of human resources that I have absolutely loved. It has built a career for me. It has provided me incredible memories. And then you'll see through this that there's parts that I really struggle with, and frankly have not loved at all. So because I'm going to critique this a little bit, I have a confession to make. I have participated. So behind me, I'll pull this closer so we can see it. And in post, we'll put the slide up. We'll put the slide up. I can sit like that instead. Okay. So first and foremost, here's my memo to human resources, copying other business leaders, and it admits that I have participated in the HR groupthink and low-value activities that this quest seeks to eliminate. In fact, I created some of them and gained personally, and I have ideas and plans to do better, and I hope that you will join me. So I start with an admission that what I am critical of here, I also spread around the world, and was a big part of believing that these were the right things to do at the time. And it came from my heart. And to all the other human resources people that I speak to out there, I know it's coming from your hearts as well. But we have to be critical, and we have to look at what impact we've had unintended. What were the unintended consequences of some of the ways that we treated humans in the workplace, and how we set up the systems, the processes, the business practices that make up what happens in the workplace today. So that's my first tongue-in-cheek piece to say, I know I'm going to be a little bit critical of human resources, but I also am humble enough to recognize that I created some of this, but never too late to change your ways, if you will. So that brings us to this chapter, HRMAGEDDON. So this one is all about this incredible moment we're at through this fourth turning, to see the unprecedented changes we're going to have in the way we work and live and earn and learn. And I've framed that through 3 huge crises, 5 confronting questions, and at the end, I ultimately propose an entirely new purpose for human resources so we can build better futures. Now, you recall through some of the other work that I have, the Staying Human and Staying Ahead series starts with work is broken, school maybe too. And, HR is a big reason for that. Now, it's taken me a long time to decide what my voice should be and what my tone should be as I share these thoughts, because, I'll prove out that they're good thoughts, they're needed, they're somewhat controversial. It's a bit of a whistleblower tone, if you will. But at the same time, I'm speaking to my colleagues, many of which are great friends, a couple of which I would consider loved ones. many of whom I worked alongside for such a long period of time, and they may not always see the need for change that I see. That's kind of one of my big strengths is seeing out into the future a little bit. So the voice I'm choosing to try and make this not too much of an attack towards human resources is the idea of HRMAGEDDON, and that there's this giant meteor coming towards us, and this is HR's opportunity to get out in front of it and save humanity in the workplace for the next 3 decades. And the tagline I have for it here is the gripping story of HR's historic and heroic self-sacrifice to build better futures for all. And that's the voice I'm using now. And it's better than the one I started with 18 months ago. So I'll tell you the story about the Let's Eradicate HR comedy show. And this is 100% a true story. Some of the backstory, if you haven't listened up to now, is I ended up getting fired by human resources a few years ago, and the way it was handled was just really, really poor. And I mean, there were parts that I did that report to, but it shouldn't have ended up the way it ended up. At any rate, it's where I started my reflection on we need much better human resources, and so much so that I think we need to get rid of human resources entirely. So I hosted the Let's Eradicate HR comedy show at Yuck Yucks in Toronto, and I hired 2 professional comedians to come, and we did like a 90-minute show. I'd do a 15-minute presentation, then one comedian would come out, and then I would do another presentation, then the other comedian came out, and then I closed it up with the final presentation. And I called it a happy hour because I held it on a Thursday. I offered, it was right downtown Toronto, so I was mainly going after the corporate audience and business leaders. So I had free drinks and free food, and it was just a chance to get out there. And I knew it was very early in my process, and I wasn't ready to take my ideas broader, and I wasn't the market wasn't ready for my ideas yet. But I wanted to find out what it would take to host a show like this, and I also wanted to put my stake in the ground to say, whoa, time out. Like, we cannot continue with human resources the way that it is. But the show is not a success at all for many reasons. But, we had room for about 100, and about 25 people showed up. And as I saw them all come in, it was all just HR people. In my mind, I had imagined that, everybody from Bay Street and the banks and the consultancies and everybody else who works downtown Toronto would be like, yeah, let's eradicate HR. And they'd come to the show. But I'd done a really shitty job of marketing it because I was, nervous and not quite ready. But, I'm a risk taker, and, I learned by doing. So I did it, but it ended up just being this really uncomfortable roast of HR where the comedians were just berating them, saying things like, if you didn't exist anymore, what would be different? I mean, nobody knows what you do anyways. I guess I know it'd be different. Nobody would know when anybody's birthday is. There wouldn't be cake in the cafeteria. And I was like, oh shit. This is maybe not going as I had envisioned it in my head. But no regrets. The right people who did see it were very encouraging. They came to me and said, you're really onto something. It's going to be hard for you to get this message across, but like you're really onto something. So what I learned from that is, it's really hard to get betrayed and canceled by your beloved profession and then start a movement to eradicate them without seeming bitter. So HRMAGEDDON is my second attempt, and kind of shifts it to a perhaps less bitter tone, if you will, but nonetheless, still a tone calling for some change. I'm just going to fix my lighting here for a second. Okay. So let me walk you through now. I'll share my love affair with HR, so why I fell in love with it. I'll share my heartbreak. I'll take us through the 3 huge crises, the 5 confronting questions, and a new purpose for HR, probably over the next hour or so. So, and Matt, I see you're available on my text too. I'll keep this here in front of me. Feel free to chime in with any comments, any questions, or suggestions as well. So hopefully it's clear where we're going, and thanks for your patience as we get that laid out. So here's why I fell in love with human resources. So we go back to, frankly, 1998, and I had just joined this Fairmont hotel chain as, at this point, just a busboy and an afternoon tea server. And I couldn't believe how amazing they treated their employees. Like, we had these great locker rooms and cafeterias with free food, and they even had an electronic polishing machine for polishing your shoes. Like, they expected a great deal out of their employees, but they also treated the employees really, really well. And when I got speaking to this amazing, the first human resources director I ever had, a lady by the name of Karen. Karen, also a great friend and mentor in due time, she explained to me the idea of the service profit chain. And the service profit chain, which I'm not sure exists, and certainly doesn't exist as important as it did back then, and that's tragic. But the service profit chain simply says, if you take care of your employees will take care of your customers. And if you take care of your customers will take care of your shareholders, right? That profit is generated by how well we serve people, and how well we serve people is how well we treat our employees. You know, we had a saying that our employees will only treat our guests as well as we treat our employees. And I just love that idea. I thought it made so much sense to me. You know, I like to be treated well as an employee, but I'm also the kind of person who likes to do things for other people. So that was my way of seeing strategically how HR could fit in the business, and why it is, you know, even more important than things like marketing or accounting or technology or other pieces. The second thing that I really started to fall in love with HR was particularly after I got that first training manager job. One of the cool things about being somebody who teaches training courses and writes training courses for a corporate environment is you also get to take a whole bunch of them. And you're constantly at conferences. You know, if I'm a learner, I love to learn. You know, remember, I'm a dropout. So I've always said I was such a poor academic, such a shitty student, that I had to become a lifelong learner. So this job was just perfect for me, because I got to go to all these conferences and had to keep up on all these books and all the latest great thinking that was out there. And Fairmont was so committed to it that I got to you know, follow some of the absolute goats of leadership development, people like Stephen Covey, who wrote The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, Tom Peters, who wrote a book called In Pursuit of Excellence, Ken Blanchard, who wrote something called Situational Leadership, and Who Moved My Cheese, and a number of others. Marcus Buckingham, or more importantly, the Gallup organization, who wrote books like First Break All the Rules and Now Discover Your Strengths. And this was really the golden age of leadership development. And I still have a number of those books, particularly The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People and other stuff by Stephen Covey, and what's now the Franklin Covey organization, and Gallup, in the work that I do. And it's timeless. You know, sadly, I'll argue when we get to that, it's one of the confronting questions is about learning and development in the workplace. You know, it was in a golden age where we had these integrated models, some incredible thinking. Like, human resources is really a young function. It really only started 50 years ago, maybe 70 years ago at most. And it you know, started as personnel and administration, and then it started to move itself a little bit more into management and the science of management, and then into organizational design. And into leadership development, and then into where I consider my field now, which is more broadly called talent management, if you will. So we had this awesome period between, I'd say, 1995 and 2010, where there were some great thought leaders out there who had big picture thinking, really integrated models, closely tied to the business. David Ulrich is a professor at Michigan. He would be another one of those greats. He still is at Michigan and still is producing great integrated stuff. But we made a shift later to get away from these large integrated models, and things became a little bit more very specific and topical, right? Whether it's, you wanted to talk about the growth mindset or authenticity, vulnerability, all these pieces that are purpose, all these pieces that are certainly important, but they don't hang on a larger integrated framework that is closely tied to the business the way that things did in the past. So I became a learning geek, a keener, if you will, and just loved being able to learn all the time. And along the way, one of the things that I learned is this formula you see behind me, which is P, which stands for productivity, equals T multiplied by the sum of R plus E plus R. So obviously I'll walk you through what those are. And this formula is a metaphor more than anything else. I mean, you could probably model it out and get numbers from it, but at any rate, it's a way of thinking about leadership. And I'll be deliberate about how I teach this, because I think we'll clip this out. It's one of the stars of the show, if you will, when it comes to, what did we know 25 years ago that we should still be doing, and that all leaders today should still know. And it's the principle of productivity. Ultimately, as a manager, as a leader, your job today or in the past was to get people to produce. And the best way to do that, the way that is most enduring, the way that brings the most out of other people, instead of just, being an asshole boss who's more of a stick than a carrot, is through understanding their talent. That's the T. Building a strong relationship, that's the first R. Setting clear expectations, that's the E. And providing meaningful recognition, that's the R. So an entire practice was built through the work that I did around those four things, is to say, the first and most important decision a manager makes is who to hire. I love the saying, hire hard. How much do I love it? Hire hard, fire easy, I think is what we mean by that. Meaning, if you've really worked hard to hire somebody and they're a good fit and it's not working, then it's a little bit easier to say goodbye to them, because both parties know this isn't for them. There's a reason why. Sorry, it's not fire easy, it's manage easy. Hire hard, manage easy. Fire quick is the third part of that. And what that means is, if you get that selection decision right, if you've hired a person that's going to excel in that role, then managing them becomes dead easy. If you ask managers who you spend the most time with, is it your top performers or your average performers or your worst performers? It's always the worst performers. And that makes no sense at all. Our time should be either in the middle or at the very top, and it's arguable which one you would focus on there. But there's ways to kind of do both, which is where that fire quickly piece comes in. If somebody's at the bottom, they're not getting it. Don't let that take your time as a manager. Let's go back to working with the talent that we've hired. But then we had a much deeper look into, how do we know who is most likely to succeed in those roles? And that's where you get into this whole practice around talent and how people are wired and motivated to perform different tasks. Each one of us have certain things that we're great at and we can do all day long. We never get tired. We never burn out when we're doing it. If we're learning something, we learn so quickly because it's just fitting the way that we're wired. We access flow state so much quicker. And, when you'll see there's a whole bunch that we teach around that. But the whole focus of this formula, productivity equals talent multiplied by the sum of relationship, expectation, and recognition, is the talent. I would say I put 75% of my effort as a manager and as a leader into the T. When you got it right, everything else comes really, really easy. So once you've handled that most important decision that managers are ever going to make, who to hire, then we get into kind of the function of that person's there and what can you do with them to bring out even more. And the first one is relationship, and it's all about trust. And the Gallup book, First Break All the Rules, that I referenced a little bit earlier, was the first to really make the argument or show through their quantitative studies, because that's what Gallup does. They handle, analytics and data and questions and surveys better than anybody in the world. But what they saw was the importance of relationships at work. They argued a number of things. Managers understand that fair does not equal equal, which means we're not saying to treat all of your employees the same. Of course, respect and integrity and equality, like human rights, that's not what we're talking about. What we're talking about, if I, was a little bit more lenient on you because you were late today, and it was the first time you've been late for a long time, and I know you have a sick kid and you were at the children's hospital, of course I'm going to deal with that much differently than the person who's maybe repeatedly late and comes in, looking like they had a pretty fun and late night the night before. So that was, a first way to break all the rules back then, to say you don't have to treat all your employees the same. Another one was they realized the importance of having a best friend at work. And that when we're working alongside other people that we have great relationships with, we can produce so much more and feel so much better. So there's a whole bunch of work of leadership and management that's just all about building relationships with you and each employee that you lead. We call that individualization, but also looking at the relationships amongst the team. And ultimately, trust is what we're looking for out of the relationships. The next one is expectations. I mean, it's fine to have everybody liking each other and having a good time and being able to quickly resolve conflict, but at the same time, there are some tasks that need to get done. There is something that we have to make sure we accomplish as a team, and that comes from expectations. Sharing expectations, meaning it's clear what you need to do. You know where to go if you need help getting it done, and you know how you'll be held accountable or what the consequences are if we miss those expectations. So clarity of expectations is so important. And just as an aside, what I've observed through my quarter century working with leaders is where they struggle most with setting expectations. Initially I thought that it was all about they didn't want to be rude. They felt like they were imposing themselves on somebody else. And that's certainly part of it. But I've come to realize that more so, it's that the expectations aren't clear in their head. At a certain point, when you get beyond, the very basic parts of, here's exactly the tasks you're supposed to do, and it's more about here's kind of the outcome you're supposed to produce, or here's why we're doing something. For many managers, the expectations might not be completely clear in their head, and they haven't taken the time to sit down and say, what am I really looking for here? So that's expectations. And then the third one is recognition. I mean, we need to celebrate the wins that we have. We need to capture stories of greatness, tell the person why that was great, and tell others why it was great. That's the form of recognition. I mean, whether it's as simple as a saying thank you for a job well done, or it's a token gift of some sort, or it's bringing somebody up on a stage or calling them out at the beginning of a pre-shift meeting to say, hey, let me tell you a story about what Omar did on the weekend, and here's what Omar did, and we'd like to thank him, and here's why it was important, and it reinforces our whole thing we've been talking about, how when we really understand the guest needs, not only are they happier, but it gives us an opportunity to upsell other services, whatever it is, using that recognition moment to make it specific to the individual, connected to a story and why it mattered. So those three functions of management, I'd say relationship, expectation, and recognition, are after we've selected that person, the difference that the manager can make. So I fell in love with that concept. I spent 20 years expanding it. I spent 20 years extrapolating, teaching it, writing various programs, and sharing it with frankly, thousands of people around the world. So there's a takeaway there. You'll see that through all my work. It is actually a course that I teach called Your Leadership Formula, one of the products that we have here, and we teach it sometimes in a 3 or 4 hour webinar like this, which only kind of gets the ideas across. The best format is in 3 6-hour days, so 18 hours over 3 days in a classroom with other people practicing these skills. Major love affair continued after I left Lake Louise and after I left Canada to go to Dubai, and had the opportunity to look after all of the training and development for Fairmont Hotel's first international property, our flagship property in Dubai, United Arab Emirates. And there, very similar work, very similar purposes, but it was with a global audience instead of the Canadian audience or the North American audience. The United Arab Emirates, Dubai specifically, there's 3 or 4 million people there, and I think only 1 million are local Emiratis. The rest of the workforce is brought in from around the world. And at the Fairmont Dubai where we had 53 different nationalities that worked for us. So I got to see how universal talents were. Cultures are very different. And I got to see what makes, a Filipino culture compared to an Indian culture, compared to a South African culture, compared to a Kenyan culture, compared to, you name it, all of them. And, you can definitely see that the cultures are different, but the talents that it takes to be a good manager or to express hospitality are universal. They can be expressed slightly differently, right? It may look a little different, may sound a little different, but to genuinely care about somebody else, um, it it's human and it's universal. So what I loved was being able to train, but then also go recruit. So when I wasn't training there, what I was doing was flying in with the team to countries all around the world, and we'd fly in, and a local agent would have 100 or so people for us to interview, and we would get to sit in a room all day and just interview people. And what an incredible way to understand a country, to understand people. Um, you know, Most formative and favorite period of my life. If I could go back and relive, 2002, and then later I went back to Dubai in 2005, I'd go back and do that job in a heartbeat. It was an absolute dream job to be able to understand talent around the world, and to take concepts like this service profit chain, which wasn't really common around the world back then. It was a bit of a Western concept, right? Because in other parts of the world, it's like, just tell them what to do. And if they don't do it, give them shit and fire them and go get somebody else. There's thousands of others who will take their job. And we were able to kind of come into that market and say, well, what if we kind of, hired great talent and then, gave them the opportunity to perform, and we treated them as well as we want them to treat our employees. So absolutely a highlight of my career, and a huge part of my HR love affair was understanding global human talent and potential. And then the last one is the amazing HR leaders. Like I've worked with hundreds of them around the world. Of course, they're not all great, which is why I say the amazing ones. many of them, there's kind of different archetypes of HR, right? There's some who are like the president of fun, and they're all about birthday cakes and parties, and there's some who are like the risk manager, and they're all about, change management, and we can't do this, and if we do that, it's going to fall apart and won't get implemented. There's some who are the administrators and want things processed really quickly, or here's how to make it efficient, or here's the policies and the rules, and here's how we have to follow each policy, and they're not comfortable bending those rules. And there's merit to all those archetypes. And then there's the really strategic, big picture thinking, understanding the principles of human motivation leaders. And whatever archetype they were, they all, in my experience, came from a place of sincerely wanting to help. There's not a lot of jerks in human resources, and frankly, they're a lot of fun too. You don't see that often, but when you get some HR people behind a closed door, or you get some HR people at a conference, oh, they know how to party. It can be a great time. So I absolutely fell in love with HR. And think of that from 1997 to 2020, maybe 2018. But then came HR heartbreak. Some of the things that I saw was we started to shift to being more about the business than the employee. That service profit chain got lost in digitization and benchmarking and standardization of processes, and it stopped being about, hey, we're here for the employee, and it became more about, we're here for the business. The next one was this excessive use of benchmarking and consulting. And what I mean by that is I became shocked at how much of the industry HR stopped doing itself. I think as CEOs and boards started to see the importance of talent, that they started to build the budgets of human resources, over the last 25 years, and increasingly, typically every year. And it really resulted more in HR people having these budgets to go to consultants. And I became amazed at how many HR professionals, instead of actually building things themselves, implementing things themselves, adjusting them, getting the feedback, listening, doing focus groups, they would sell that out to consultants and kind of give away what was at the core of where our strategic expertise should have been. And they became just kind of PowerPoint jockeys or consultant coordinators. And a lot of people fell into that trap, unfortunately. And that also resulted in a lot of benchmarking. This is a major problem we have, is HR got to the environment where we would now phone everybody and benchmark their other practices. There's benchmarking of salaries. There's benchmarking of policies. How many vacation days are you going to get over and above what's legal? What's your policy on cell phones in the workplace? What's your and I think I started to observe a reluctance of human resources to stick their neck out and say, this is how we're going to be different. This is what we're going to do that our competitors aren't doing. That's going to make our employees happier, which is going to make our customers happier, which is going to make our shareholders happier. And it just kind of all became either from the same 6 or 7 consultants out there in the world, or the same things that your neighbors were doing. And when we wanted to make a change, it was more about, when will the entire market make the change, rather than when you could do it to get competitive advantage. Low accountability for technology is the third thing that started to create heartbreak for me. We shifted so much money, starting in the early 2000s right up to now, to the technology agenda hijacked the human resources strategy. You could see it in the way our teams were structured. We started to build these technology teams and these analytics teams and these operations teams, and then we would disrupt a whole bunch of what managers were doing by having to put in these new technological systems that had overpromised and underdelivered, and it just it became a big challenge. And because so many of those things we were doing weren't easy to use, or weren't always delivering the results, we actually had to create this sub function called change management. And again, unintended consequences, opportunities, opportunity cost. We didn't do it to slow down the organization. We did it because we wanted to help. But we created this whole practice and a whole position around how do we manage change for employees so it can be adopted. And it took what could have been built by 2 or 3 people in 3 months. If there was a project, you put 2 or 3 people on it, it'd take 3 months, you'd get it launched, it would be out there. And it turned these initiatives and projects into these monsters that needed a committee of 8 people on it, and things needed to be socialized, and everybody needed a voice. And we really upplayed this idea of change management. And nobody would argue because they had seen enough shitty projects come out of HR that failed, and they thought that change management was going to be the issue. And it really wasn't. It's ultimately the need of the program and the design of the program that made all the difference. And I think, this is not a popular opinion, because there's lots of people, again, even a loved one in HR that I have, that really believe in this change management. And so I do want to respect that. But, I've been critical of it for a long time. And when COVID started and we needed to start to work from home every single day, and we needed to get comfortable with Zoom, and we needed to deal with hybrid workers, we did that in a matter of weeks because we had to. Well, those were the exact same types of projects that would have had a committee of 10 and 10 months and a pilot and adjustments to get across, right? If you were trying to implement a Zoom so people could work from home once in a while, literally companies were spending months and months and months trying to get this going, and answering all these what if questions that frankly others had answered. And then a crisis comes along and the change can be handled just like that. So the change management piece, I think, really slowed down human resources ability to make change quick enough, and bogged down the organization. The saying, a donkey is a horse created by committee. A lot of the projects that HR launched in the last decade in particular ended up feeling a little bit like that, and kind of missed the mark from these more creative one-off things that one person was accountable for. And that was the other problem with using so many consultants and focusing so much on change management is, early in my career from 2000 to 2010, when me or my small team of 2 or 3 people had to create a major organization-wide initiative, right, that would impact 50,000 people, and we were responsible, just us, for making sure it got across the finish line and had an impact. Well, when you get a change manager in there, and a project management office, and a consultant in there, and then a committee that's going to oversee it, like all of a sudden there's no sense of contribution from the individual who at the core is the expert, right? The expert of the topic that we're working on, but also the person who knows the audience and the people the best. So that became incredibly frustrating for me. And then the last one, the fun police. We have worked so hard as HR professionals to not come across like the police, and we're losing ground. And you can see it in popular culture, and in the TV shows and movies nowadays. There's been an explosion of it ever since, in the last 5 years, where HR is always that person that gets disrespected, that nobody likes. And as soon as somebody says something slightly inappropriate, they're like, I'm going to call HR on you. Or HR walks in the room and everybody goes like, shh, shh, HR is here, HR is here. And, you know, of course, it is important that there are people in the organization to protect social values and human rights. And that should be a mix of some human resources people and some legal people, some outside. This is a perfect place where outside expertise should be used. But our brand became more and more about the fun police. So ultimately, that was my HR heartbreak. So rather than eradicating them, I've decided that this is my letter to HR. Dear HR, I'm breaking up with you, but I hope we can still be friends. I'm filled with gratitude and no regrets. Your friend always. So I know that some of these things I also created. I know our hearts have been in the right place. None of this we did intentional, but this is more about what have been our blind spots, what has been our opportunity cost, and what were the unintended consequences of some of the things that we did. So I'm going to give myself just 1 minute break here, and we're going to get into the three crises. And the first crisis is the replication crisis. So hang tight for 60 seconds, and I'll be back shortly. Okay, let me just check in with Matt and see where he's at and how he's doing. Matt, I just sent you a text if you're following the stream there. Okay, let's get into the three crises, and I'll work my way through them. So the first one is not my concept; it's one I agree with entirely, and it kind of was one of those moments while I was doing this research and this work that when I heard it, I'm like, okay, I'm on the right track. And it's called the replication crisis. So, at the core of human resources is the social sciences or behavioral sciences, if you will. And, you know, kind of the top degree you get in that is a PhD in IO psychology, IO standing for industrial organizational psychology. And of course, it's research based, right? We need to conduct scientific research, get data, lots of quantitative data, and propose these new thoughts for human resources or social behavioral sciences. And it became clear in recent years. Malcolm Gladwell was the first person to start to point this out, and how he phrased it was, if you look at what's called the SSRN, Social Sciences Research Network, and it's a repository for all of the papers that have been published from all the schools around the world. Not all of them, but a vast majority of them. Well, him and other experts claim that up to 80% of those studies have never been replicated. Right. And so what that means, if you're not familiar with with how it's supposed to work, and I'm only loosely familiar because, as I said, I'm not a great academic at all. But the whole idea of publishing a paper is that it should be peer reviewed and then it should be replicated, meaning a body of peers who would be in your cohort or experts have reviewed it and critiqued it. But then it can also be taken and replicated. So if I'm going to argue that if I increase my employees' happiness by 10%, it's going to result in 3% more revenue or 3% more profit. Well, somebody else has to go and try and replicate similar findings. And in human resources, they're actually using the term a replication crisis, meaning almost everything we built these beliefs on and created these systems around human motivation in the workplace and how work is supposed to work has not been peer reviewed or replicated. And that doesn't surprise me. I would take it even a step further. The research agenda in human resources has also been hijacked by the consultants. I'm sure there's amazing research going on in the universities, but I don't see it making its way to the workplace. It's kind of universities talking amongst themselves, and it's very slow for it to get to policy in the workplace or spending money on what things should be spent on in the workplace or strategy in the workplace. Now, people look at research and they will quote these giant consultants and claim that the quantitative research that we're using to justify this policy is that 70% of CEOs feel this is important. Well, just because the person selling something has asked CEOs, what's important to you next year, and the CEOs say, well, these four things, and we say, okay, well, so it's going to be innovation, leadership development, change, working from home, these pieces. And if anything, they're just trend spotting. And then we use those basic surveys kind of as our research. And I have been looking deeply and with various AI tools to find actual research for some of the long-standing and what I still believe to be true pieces of how we think about HR, and I can't find it. Academic databases, I have a tough time working my way around, and yes, for sure, Google Scholar, and now I'm getting Perplexity and Consensus AI to look for it, and I can't find it. Every time I try and find this research, it's often given by a consulting firm or a technology firm. And I don't think I want the data for whether something is needed or not to come from the person selling the thing that they're claiming is needed. So that's the first one, is a giant replication crisis, which led me to decide that I should try my own research methodology. And if we can be honest that a lot of the research out there is flawed, maybe it can take away some of the academic constraints that we have, that we're worried about, saying things, and we can get back to more of a common sense approach. And so I created my own research methodology called the 20 Strangers Challenge. So I'm just going to pause and call Matt here. He is available, so you'll hear him on audio, but I just want to touch base with him and see what he thought of the first little bit and what questions he might have.
Hey, how's it going?
Hey, good. Be nice and loud because you're just coming through on my speakerphone. How's it going?
Okay, pretty good. You?
Good. So I just want to touch base and see what questions you have about anything I've shared so far around HR, and if not questions, maybe points that you'd like to highlight that you find to be true and on your mind as well?
Specifically around what you've spoken about so far, I guess you made a lot of good points, and I was wondering why some of these practices aren't actually being used in workplaces today. Specifically, like treating workers like they matter in order for them to treat your customers well. Stuff like that, I personally haven't seen in the workplace.
You haven't seen that type of approach.
Correct.
Great question. So why did we start to drift away from the service profit chain? Why did we start to drift away from a more human, creative way of managing work and humans in the workplace? If I paraphrase the question.
Yes.
The first thing that comes to my mind really connects to in the chapter Work is Broken, School Maybe Too, where I talk about overstimulation, STEM being science, technology, engineering, and math, and that we're overstimulated, which of course is a play on overstimulated. And we've treated the workplace as a science to be managed. We've treated employees and frankly customers as data points, to be segmented, predicted, tried to understand that way. And the management is a science and an art, right? I'm not saying we shouldn't have used any of that, and that we shouldn't be using STEM. It's overstimulated. We lost the art part of it. We locked down on the science part, and I think it became. I think boards have something to do with it, and I think CEOs and executive teams have something to do with it, because humans are so complex, and we're soft and fuzzy and hard to understand, and trying to turn it into something more scientific, maybe scientific versus Socratic, right? If you, by trying to turn it into something more scientific that's data driven, that is a process on a Gantt chart, or I'm sure. So in your environment, Matt, do you use any of the quality programs like Six Sigma or ISO or Baldrige, or in your factory, do you have any kind of manufacturing quality assurance programs?
I use Six Sigma, yes.
Great. So I think it was the Six Sigmatization of humans in the workplace. And instead of thinking about what is within the human being that we can release through understanding their talents, building a great relationship, giving them clear expectations, providing them meaningful recognition, guiding them with a clear purpose or direction, not even clear, but a meaningful one, instead of just something worth rolling your eyes at. All those are difficult, and all those are very interpersonal, and not always lending themselves to what would be more concrete and measurable, right? So somebody can say, hey, we applied this Six Sigma thinking to our recruiting process, and our costs for hiring are down this much, our quality of hire is up this much, various things like that, instead of really looking at, we've realized that in this team, at this time, at this place, for this topic, the people are feeling this way. The imagination needs to go that way. And I think it just became, I'm just thinking out loud here, Matt, but I think it just became a much more concrete and popular thing to lean towards management practices. General Electric was the ones who kind of first got them started, and then when Six Sigma came out, it really kind of continued to explode. And then digitization, so quality assurance, and digitization, I think, has shifted the focus from human beings, and ironically, it's the human beings where the innovation really lie. Like, we are stuck, and we have an innovation crisis in the workplace because we're putting all of our efforts towards these systems and these computers. We're not really doing the stuff that takes, to plug future chapters, the advantage human. We're not unleashing the human insight, the flow state, and the hospitality. What do you think of that? That's a great question, by the way. Thank you for that.
Yeah, no problem.
So defend Six Sigma, like, even whether you agree with it, don't agree with it. I know it's a great tool. How has it served your employees? Like, what would your employees feel about the Six Sigma quality management practices relative to other things? What's their thoughts on it?
I would, to be honest, I'd probably have to be more informed on Six Sigma before answering that question. Like, I know that it's something that we use, and I know the basics of it, but I wouldn't be able to tell you in detail how it affects our workplace, to be honest.
Okay. What other thoughts or questions?
So not a question, but I thought it was very interesting when you mentioned during COVID how everyone figured out how to work from home through Zoom very quickly, whereas typically that would take like 10 months of meetings, and like it would usually that would take a long time, and that would be such a mess. But when a crisis happens, people are able to figure it out just like that. And maybe there's something we can do to work more efficiently and be like that all the time. I thought that was interesting.
Yeah. I appreciate that. It's sad to say, but the first thing we got to do is, unfortunately, put the people whose jobs it is to overmanage these things and direct them in other areas. Like, an entire cottage industry of people whose job is basically perfectionism and total risk avoidance have really started to slow organizations down, and that ability to be a little more nimble and make experiments, right? That's why, I haven't talked about the XXX model here tonight. Explore, experiment, express. I think we need a whole bunch more experiment going out there, and be afraid to make mistakes. I mean, we say, like, fail fast and fail forward, and everybody says don't be afraid to make mistakes, but I'm just not seeing that. I'm seeing more and more people are using these practices, these consultants, these other people to try and get everything buckled down. One of the best leaders I ever worked with was the CEO at Ontario Teachers Pension Plan by the name of Ron Mock. Real visionary, a quantitative guy, came out of capital markets, so he understood quantitative side, but also understood the art of leadership and the art of investing. And he used to always say, listen, we're flying to Mars, and we know we can only get 60% of the way there, but we'll figure the rest out on the way. And that's a spirit that I really loved in Ron, that really helped that organization, and that I think we need more of, frankly.
Yeah, I agree, and I feel like, so you mentioned that we should experiment more and that we shouldn't be afraid to fail. But I also feel like the problem is that the majority of people in the workplace, they're not working to exceed expectations. They're working to not fail. Like, it's rather like, instead of working for greatness, they're working to just not do do that. And I feel like that's probably a big part of why people aren't, taking chances, experimenting with new things, because they just don't want that failure and to potentially get fired or not move up in the workplace, I believe.
Yeah. Wow, that pops a whole bunch of things in my brain. I think you're so right. And there's always been an element of that in the workplace, but where it is the opposite is becoming much less rare, where people are prepared to take that if it's going to be, it's up to me kind of mindset. It reminds me when my kids were young and I would tell them to go find something. They'd come back and say, I can't find it. I don't know where it is. And I'd just say to them, okay, did you look hard enough like you were really trying to find it? Or did you just go look a little bit so you could come back and say you couldn't find it? So I would go find it. Right? Then I'd tell them, look with your hands. Did you look with your hands? Don't look with your eyes. We don't look with our eyes. We move everything. We look with our hands. Anyways, it was tough being one of my kids. So, I think there becomes this level of motivation that, why take the risk? The Chinese have a saying that translates something along the lines of the first bird out of the tree gets shot, or the nail that sticks out gets hammered. And I think, it's an old proverb. I think there's an element of that has slipped into our workplace cultures. But even more so, Matt, the very first response I had was, well, of course that's going in the wrong direction, because the very nature of the social contract between employee and workplace is broken worse than it's ever been broken before. The whole idea was, I will work for you and do what you ask me to do, and maybe do a little bit more, because you will pay me enough that I can afford to live. And when what we're paying isn't a livable wage or hasn't kept up with inflation, that's got to be the place to start. I mean, corporations, here's an example of benchmarking. Here's what most businesses do. Most businesses will benchmark what their annual increase is going to be. And they will contact other businesses and find out, or it'll be owned by a private equity firm that owns 100 different businesses. So they get to benchmark within themselves. And 90% of the time, it's 3%, right? You get a 3% increase. And it's really just a cost of living increase. In recent years, I've heard some good organizations are going to 5, 6, and 7% increases on base salaries. It's not enough. Like it's just not enough. I remember arguing with one client who was giving just the normal 3%, which historically would be, where inflation kind of goes, and saying to them, but wait, we know that 90% of our employees take the subway, the TTC, to work. And we know the TTC just raised their fares by 50 cents. Right. And we know the price of gas to this, and the whole concept of adjusting salaries for what some people would call merit, which is just a huge mistake. Don't call cost of living increase merit. Or what they would say was for inflation. They've been sticking around that 3% mark, and it's just not enough. So mailing it in or doing the minimum amount of work to a certain extent feels a bit fair right now. Not to mention the intangibles, right? Those are the tangibles of the contract between employee and workplace. You pay me. But the intangibles about, allow me to learn, allow me to make great relationships, give me some flexibility, show me some empathy, allow me to be part of a community. I mean, those are under attack as well. So yeah, that was that's a great thought. Anything else?
Yeah.
What about that formula? So, if I were to ask you, I'll put you on the spot here.
Okay.
So talent is the key to that formula, right? the most important thing you have, Matt, are your talents. And
Right.
your leaders, if they're good leaders, will be working with you to build a relationship, share expectations, and provide recognition that brings the most out of your talents and directs it towards what we're trying to do together. So
Right.
I'll define talent for you, and then I want you to share what you think some of your top 2 or 3 talents might be. I'll even give you some examples for me. So the talent is the way that we're wired. It's the way that makes us different than other people. It's things that we can't not do, right? It's closely related to personality, but more specifically, it's how efficient or wide the pathways in our brains are, and what are the things we can do just super quickly, right? So training and interviewing and thinking about concepts on the spot would be a talent that I have that perhaps some other people might not. Being willing to take the risks to do things even though they're going to be a bit sloppy, or will take some time until they get polished. I do stuff that's polished later, but that would be a talent of mine. So if you were to think about the 2 or 3 things that uniquely are your talents that make you different from other people that do your job, what would you say they are?
Talent wise, I'd probably say like problem solving and like ideas, like coming up with ideas. I would say would be some of my top talents. Again, there's a bunch more, but I feel like I would say those are like the main ones that I use like day to day
And
effectively.
and how so just break each of those out a little bit for me. So coming up with new ideas is a little more clear to me. That might be like kind of brainstorming or being creative. Problem solving is a big category. How do you go about solving problems in your way?
Well, there's a problem, and what you want to do is you want to get to like the root cause of why there's a problem and how you can fix it. And I guess my brain just kind of sorts all of that out quicker than most would. So I can get to the root cause of what the issue is and figure out what potential solutions there can be to solving that problem fairly quickly.
I really like the way that you use the word sort. You said my brain sorts.
Right.
So scientists have many ways of creating a language or categories for what these talents are. And there's many different models. My favorite is from the Gallup organization. From that work, Now Discover Your Strengths, and from their tool Strengths Finder. It's the best, but there are many other good ones out there, and each one's used for kind of different reasons. But one of their talents is called strategic, Matt, and that's exactly how it's described, is that your brain can very quickly sort and filter through things and play things out in your mind to see which ones are dead ends and which ones have possibilities. It's kind of like being able to look around corners that others can't. It's kind of like, what if kind of thinking, like what if then what? And how would that fit? And so that's cool. That's an amazing talent to have. And I've seen that too, even as you and I've been planning to do some of the work that we're having, that we're doing right now and we plan on doing in the future, and seeing how quickly you can grasp and either critique and come up with a better idea, or reinforce for me, yeah, that's a great idea, we should do that. I really value that in you. You do have a great way of processing, perhaps faster than some other people, and that's not intellect, right? There's lots of different ways to be smart, right? The question isn't how smart is somebody, the question is how is somebody smart. So that's awesome. Any others? What about when it comes to people? So, each of these talents you can put in various buckets. Some are about how we relate, some are about how we impact others, some are about how we think, some are about what motivates us. Tell me on the relationship side, a kind of a people related talent. What would you say, one of your top talents when it comes to people might be?
When it comes to people, I feel like just holding conversation. I feel like I can have a conversation about anything. We spoke couple weeks ago about like debates. Like I don't know if debate's a talent rather than a skill. I feel like there might be a difference there, but like having a non-judgmental, like, or like not non-biased, like being able to have a debate, but not judge the other person for having a different opinion, and being able to accept their opinion and keep an open mind and potentially change my mind because I'm listening rather than arguing. I feel like that, again, that might be a skill rather than a talent, but I'd say that's something that I'm pretty decent at.
Matt, so I want to talk about the way you just did that, because I love hearing you think out loud. So here's a way to here's a way to think about talents versus skills. Okay, we could call debate a skill, or it's an action, right? It's something that's required. We have to do it, but how we go about doing it is entirely different. The talents that you use for debate, you shared having an open mind, right? Being willing to change your mind, and you shared being a good listener. Those are talents, right? An ability to naturally be able to see another person's perspective and maybe put yourself in their shoes would be an example of how those talents make your skill or action of debate better. And if we had 4 or 5 debaters all lined up here, they might be able to compete head to head with each other, but each one is using a different set of talents to go about it, right? One might be more aggressive and very determined and quantitative is not the right word, but analytical, like being able to stick to the minutia of an idea more than other people can. One might be able to recall history and context more than another person might. One might just have a whole bunch of confidence and be able to be articulate and persuasive. Those are what we mean when we talk about talent. And I want to plug the course that we're going to have, and for those 24 students that we're recruiting to start our course this fall, a full week of this course is about understanding those talents that each of us have, and how we can productively apply them to the things we're trying to get done, because it absolutely is where incredible amounts of productivity and life satisfaction come from. And in a world where AI is the common equalizer, if we were all able to afford the same AI, it's going to be the unique approaches we have to go about things that will determine our success and frankly, I think life satisfaction more than anything. So that's awesome.
Yeah, that was very well said.
Well, it was very well thought by you. That's just what I get to do, right? I get to hear. So you thought about it, really cool. Okay, we got another 25 minutes. I'm gonna try and get through some more of these slides, finish up getting through the crises. I'll introduce the 5 confronting questions, but we'll have to do a to be continued on Tuesday to get through the rest of the HRMAGEDDON chapter.
Awesome, sounds good.
Okay, feel free to text. I might give you a call back too if I have a specific question I want, but text me any other questions you have or thoughts or ideas.
Okay, definitely.
All right, cheers. Talk to you soon.
All right, later.
Okay. Kid's brilliant. We're reverse mentors is basically a great way to think about the relationship between us, and he understands the social media world as well. So once we get into production stuff, he's going to be managing most of that production. Another one of Matt's talents is something called WOO, which stands for winning others over, or friendliness. And when Matt's in a social setting, he does not blend. He is a very outgoing guy and very lovable guy, and people are kind of naturally drawn to him. Okay, so there you go, Matt. Replication crisis. So I'm going to overstate it by saying, okay, well, listen, if so much of our research out there is bullshit, but I want to know where we stand as an HR function, because I want to try and make it better. About 2 years ago, I decided, well, I'm just going to go out and meet 20 strangers. Now, it worked very well because it was coming right out of COVID, and it was kind of coming out of where I had finished that explore part of my phase after I lost my job, had a deep depression, started reinventing myself, explored. I decided, okay, let's get out of the hammock, and now let's go find out how the rest of the world is thinking about things. So I went out and started the 20 Strangers Challenge. And on a previous podcast, I talked about how it all started the night of the Travis Scott concert in Toronto, December 29th, 2023. Don't have time to tell that story today. It'll come up a million other times. It's a signature story, if you will. But what I set myself out to do is basically say, okay, I am deficient of humans. I've been struggling from HDD, human deficit disorder, and I need to go out and meet some humans and find out what the average person out there thinks about human resources and thinks about work. So I would go out to concerts, coffee shops, bars, anywhere where you end up just talking with another person beside you. Bars are great, and it's amazing when you go to a bar, between 5 o'clock and 9 o'clock, and you sit there in a large city. It's amazing how many people are talking about work, and they're not usually talking about good stuff. They're usually bitching about their boss or politics or what's unfair or why they're stalled in their career. So it became kind of my person on the street interviews of meeting people, and I just politely find an appropriate time to interject and say, hey, I'm an author, I'm writing a book, it's about work. Could I ask you a couple of questions? And so I would lead with, what do you think of when I say HR or human resources? Right. And I did this, I still do it. So approximately, I would say I've now had the opportunity to ask at least 200 people this question over the last 18 months. Only one night did I ever meet 20 strangers in one evening. It's a goal that I challenge any of our viewers or any of our students who are going to be taking our courses to have, is to go talk to strangers. We need it. We've stopped doing it. You can't be accosting. You can't be awkward. You got to pick your moment. But I set a little goal for myself. Every time I go out, how many strangers will I meet tonight? And to ensure that I'm not being too accosting, how I define a stranger is where the conversation sparks up naturally. Either there's a natural way for me to say something, or there's a natural way where the other person has kind of broken the ice. But my highest mark for was it a stranger was when they say, sorry, I didn't catch your name. What's your name? And when they introduce themselves to me, I put them in the column as, okay, there is a stranger that I met, not somebody I accosted and forced to have my conversation. But my hypothesis was proven out. What people think of human resources is not great. And in the workplace, I'm not sure people can be this honest, right? It's really tough to critique or resist the department that looks after who gets hired, who might get fired, who's on the succession plan to get promoted in the future, HR sees themselves as just a resource for business managers who make decisions, but business managers and employees also see HR as something much more beyond that, the police. So speaking truth to power is not the easiest thing in the world. But here's what the findings were. By far, the number one thing was around policing and policy. So I won't go too much further into that. But other things that we heard, the second most common thing was, what do they do? Like, nobody really knows what human resources does or what it is as a function, particularly on the strategic sides of things, right? Which should be about, that model that we shared, talent, relationship, expectation, recognition, should be about the where the company wants to go and how to prepare employees to do that, or find employees to do that. People just really think of us as people who either are creating the policies, or they don't really know. Really common was, when I say human resources, what do you think of? They say, it makes me feel like a commodity. It makes me feel like a resource that's being pipelined into the company so it can survive and grow and make profits. It doesn't make me feel like a human. And I think that is a very apt description, or a very valid opinion to have. Very common. They're for the business, they're not for me. They will always side with the business, or they will always side with the manager. Phony and fake, that one hurt to hear, but I can see it as well. A lot of the ways that we can come across, or sometimes our nature of trying to be friendly or trying to be positive, can come across as fake. Untrustworthy, untrustworthy, typo. But then some positive things. So I wanted to pull out 3 positive things, and I had to work hard to find them. They make the workplace safe. That was the most important one. And HR absolutely has a role to play in social justice and respect in the workplace, and code of ethics and employee behavior. They're one of the teams that should have a role in that. Your compliance team and your legal team should have a bigger role, and an external hotline or ethics hotline is where it should all start. It should start outside of the organization, because if you don't handle it well, you can be deemed as untrustworthy. But we definitely need to make sure that the workplace is safe. So I was glad to hear that. A lot of people were thankful with being helped with policies. And the number one I heard was around maternity leave. Oh, they were really helpful when I had to go on maternity leave and navigate maternity leave. So I'm glad we have something for that. And then lots of people said they were nice. Obviously not the ones who were saying they're phony and fake, but the ones that were saying they were nice. So I'm making this argument that work is broken, school maybe too. I'm making an argument that HR is a big part of the problem. I'm not justifying my argument much further than this. There is research out there you can find. If you disagree with me, I would love to have a private call with you, or bring you on a future podcast, and we can argue it out. But I think the problem is fairly well framed, that the view of HR is not really great. Our impact has under-delivered. And frankly, our science that we're based on isn't that strong. So instead of trying to go and construct, the most PhD worthy, quantitative analysis, massive meta research project we can to prove those things, think of this as my assumptions. This is the art of it, from focus groups and interviews that I conducted. So obviously in there as well, because nobody knows what we do, is crisis number 2, which is an identity crisis. HR has lost who we are. People ourselves, we've lost who we are, and people don't know who we are. One of the arguments I make for this is HR is a function in business that keeps rebranding itself, right? Personnel, administration, human resources, human capital management, people and culture, talent and culture, workplace experience. Like we've over the last 20 years continually rebranded ourselves, but we keep doing the same things, right? And it's become to a situation now where people in the workplace like keep calling us HR, and they're like, oh, sorry, not HR, people and culture. And when a brand or a name like HR you can't shake, I mean, it's been harder to shake than Twitter for X. Like that should tell us something, that the identity we're trying to create for ourselves might only be in our own heads. People still very much see us as HR and will call us HR. So I think it's important that we are very deliberate about not rebranding ourselves all of the time. Now, at the same time, I will end this chapter with one final proposed HR rebrand, but it's there for a reason and it has some meat behind it. I'll share that a little bit later. The final rebrand. Okay, here's another piece around our identity crisis. A lot of HR people don't even like HR either. So it's amazing when I'm at conferences or I meet new people and we get to know each other well enough that we're, starting to be a little bit honest with each other. You often hear them say something like, well, I'm not like most HR people you'll meet. Well, I'm an HR, but what I do is different. I'm not your typical HR person. I think we got to really reflect on, again, that's a nuance we have in our own head. Other people aren't seeing that. And what can we do to help the rest of the function not do the typical things? And that's what this work seeks to do as we continue to exist in the future, which is crisis number 3, an existential crisis. What is our purpose? Why are we here? Will we be here in the future? So my prediction is that 75% of HR, what we call HR today, will not exist in 5 years. And that's heavy, right? For any of HR people, who I'm sure is going to be a whole bunch listening to this, that can be a bit of a crisis in itself, an existential crisis, of course. I guess that's why I'm calling it that. So hot take, why am I saying that? Well, obviously AI, right? AI, but not just AI for how it will run human resources, but more so how AI will change how businesses are run, reducing the factor that humans make in the business. So if humans, unfortunately, are becoming used less and less and making less and less of a factor in businesses, well, that's fundamentally going to change human resources all by itself. Furthermore, oh, hang on, my screen, that's why it kicked off. It must have been a little power glitch. I just want to bring my display going behind me again. I'll get better at managing 4 different screens here as time goes by. Come on. Portion of the Stevenson stream is brought to you by Roku and Bell. This is how Bell Internet and Roku work together. Ah, good. Just about to pull the pin. Okay, now where did I have all these windows? You can go away. You can come back over here. You can go there. And that should bring you here. And we're still streaming. Okay, I think we got it. So AI is going to be the extinction of management, right? So people were worried that robots were going to take away entry-level jobs. We're not expecting to see that for quite some time. That's why you're seeing so many jobs moving into the trades. Humans will be required to do that kind of work. But when you're looking at coordinating functions, repeatable decision-making, organizing things, spotting trends, keeping track of information, that's all what management does. It coordinates activities towards producing an outcome. So HR is by and large management of processes, management of people. I won't even say management people. It's by and large management of processes. So AI is going to take a lot of those jobs. When I went to Silicon Valley and attended the AI at Work conference held by Microsoft at the Microsoft campus and SHRM, the Society for Human Resources Management, so leading people on AI at work, their mantra was like they would say, when it comes to jobs, don't worry, AI is not going to take your job, but a human using AI will. I think they're wrong. I think they are wrong. I think they're saying that to get us to use AI in the workplace, asking human resources to do the upskilling or the training and set the policies for how to use AI in the workplace. But if we look at that with a real keen and critical eye, really we're just training AI how to do everybody's job, particularly in middle management. Now, bottom line, and I don't make that argument tonight, but it could be a good thing. I see a way that could end up being a really, really good thing for us. So here's a way of thinking about the various types of work that are out there and what jobs I think will be most hit. Well, it's not just I, but what research is suggesting which ones face the most risks. Sorry, not research, experts believe face the most risks and which don't. So a lot of jobs could be put in a category of a knowledge-based job, right? So think consultants, think human resources, think accountants, think lawyers. Those knowledge jobs account for 35% of our industry. Those jobs will be decimated by artificial intelligence, and HR being right at the core of it. We are already seeing, and this is scary. I mean, in the AI Oppenheimer chapter, we'll get into this quite deep. So I got to make sure I don't rant or get on the soapbox here. But we are already seeing AI be better than lawyers. We're seeing AI be better than therapists, right? We really thought that those human interpersonal interactions, the soft skills, would be what AI wouldn't be able to do, and it's already outperforming us. So those jobs, many of them are going to go, but also what I argue is maybe we need to think differently about how we do those things. And again, plugging the human advantages, use our human insight, find more flow state, and offer more hospitality to be able to retain some of those jobs and keep AI being directed. But I mean, if you look at what HR is, I mean, blend a therapist with a lawyer and a process administrator, pretty good description of how a lot of people fill the HR role. And we've already seen just by even ChatGPT 4 was already beating those functions and being more being better at doing them and being preferred when given a choice by people. So the knowledge work at the top, those 35% are going to be in big trouble. The rest, to a much smaller extent, there will be changes to some of them. Production type jobs, so think factories, think construction, think anything we're making and doing. Transportation jobs, so pilots, airplanes, taxi cab drivers, truckers, Uber, here that makes up 10% of those jobs. I got to think that while AI is just a contributor to the autonomous vehicles and other things that are coming, those are going to be in trouble as well. So I'd say that's the next one that's going to be a problem, but it's a ways off yet. And then the bottom two, ones that I'm pretty passionate about, I think we're going to see these two job families grow. Service and sales. So think of servers, think of bartenders, think of relationship-based salespeople, where it's about a human connection. Those are going to become increasingly important. And then a category around care, education, and government. So think teachers, nurses, doctors, all of those types of things are going to be safe and perhaps grow and be enabled by AI, be able to do even better bigger things than AI. But the point I'm making is it's the knowledge worker right at the top of that list, a third of our workforce sitting right in the middle. So these are not the ultra rich and they're not the working class. They're the people who, earn money that can really make our economy go around, because there's a lot of them, and they make a few $100,000 a year, buy the houses, take the vacations, do all the things. That's the biggest risk for us, is what's going to happen to that middle management area, if you will. So that's the existential crisis that I'm speaking of. Let me just get my mouse to the right spot. And yeah, I made this point earlier, but the AI sweet spots: process, knowledge, advice, network, availability. They're available 24/7, objectivity, and they're already beating lawyers, consultants, therapists, compliance officers, and most other knowledge workers. So 3 crises. Replication crisis: is our science any good? Identity crisis: what the heck do we do, and does anybody know it? And existential crisis: will we continue to exist in a future that's driven by AI, but also in a future where the entire model of work is different? It's the rules are going to change. They're going to change very, very quickly. We need to be shifting to something else, and that's obviously what my work is all about. So take 5 more minutes here, and I just want to start to tee up and introduce the 5 confronting questions. And then on Tuesday, we'll work through the 5 questions, and I'll share the new purpose and new brand for human resources. So this work started back what I call in the hammock, when I was exploring, in the exploration first phase of the 3 X's: explore, experiment, express. And through philosophy, and I previously mentioned Alan Watts. So studying philosophy, studying psychology, it became clear to me that the power of embracing the dark sides of things, of integrating our shadow selves and trying to put the dark side in a useful spot where it can play a role. And I thought long and long and long about that, so there's something that I don't like about HR. I'm having a tough time spending the second half of my career doing the same thing in HR. What's the dark side of human resources? And I framed that question by saying, that's great, but what if, right? So, hey, HR, that's great, but what if? What if we acknowledged that there might be a bit of a dark side, right? So people are asking, what does the dark side mean? And it doesn't mean the violence or 7 deadly sins, that type of dark side. If I contrast it here to what you see with the light side versus the dark side, I mean, the light side is what we see and who we claim to be, right? It's firmly held beliefs, it's our behaviors, it's our ideas, it's the solutions we propose, it's our metrics. The dark side is what we don't see that accompanies that. It's the insights that we're denying. It's ignored motives. It's lost opportunities. It's opportunity cost. It's unintended consequences. It's missing pieces. It's the stuff that, it may be tough to speak truth to power, so others may not say it to us, but also really difficult for us to be able to see those things. So that I was able to summarize into these 3 things. When I'm talking dark sides, I've categorized it to unintended consequences, opportunity costs, and blind spots. And I deconstructed everything I know about human resources and the way that it is created today, and asked myself and asked my colleagues questions around, what's the unintended consequence of that? We think it's doing this, but how did it backfire? Trying to think of an example here. I'll give you an example. An unintended consequence of SMART objectives, right? So in a performance review, we set annual goals. We use an acronym called SMART: specific, measurable, agreed upon, resourced, and time-bound to measure how well a person is doing on their goals and to make sure it's nice and clear. Well, an unintended consequence of that was the creation of all these other measurement systems that people had to build that were really just measuring activity and small improvements in input to the process rather than actually accomplishing the goal itself. In one of Malcolm Gladwell's books, he talks about an unintended consequence where a daycare decided to make a $5 penalty if you were late picking your children up past 5:15 or whatever, and they were putting that $5 towards a charity of some sort, right? But they wanted to ensure people would pick their kids up on time. The amount of parents who came late increased significantly because people were just like, oh great, I don't need to pick the kid up on time, I'll just spend $5, and for $5 I can spend another half hour at work. So there's a whole bunch of those unintended consequences from the policies and systems that we've been putting in place that we need to look at. Opportunity cost, because our agendas have been hijacked or our budgets have been hijacked in the last 25 years towards technology, management systems, other pieces that really didn't move the needle for us. Just imagine if we had taken that concrete resource, money, but also the time and energy and give a shit factor that people had and put it more towards things like relationship in the workplace, giving employees a great manager, coming up with human innovation by creating workplace cultures that were driven on debate and disagreement and competition. We focus so much on collaboration as a value. Well, maybe an opportunity cost there is competition, right? If it's hard to be able to have both of those. And then blind spots. What are the unknowns that we just don't see, that we don't know is there? And right now, AI at work is a huge blind spot for human resources that obviously this work seeks to help with. And then 2 more slides, and then we'll be done for tonight. So those are the crises that are facing HR. The 5 confronting questions I've really aimed and narrowed down to just 5. I had 13 at one point, but there's one around culture. There's one around technology. There's one about hiring, firing, and promoting. That's kind of how I simply try and describe talent management. I think we actually probably got to put, no, sorry, I was going to say development in there. There's one about performance management, which is goals and how we decide how people are doing and ultimately how they get paid. And then number 5, this slide's outdated. That says HR's diagnosis. I'll get to that differently. The 5th one that I put in there is related to learning and development. How do we train and how do we learn in the workplace? So to foreshadow Tuesday's live stream, here's the 5 confronting questions. And I'll spend a good 15 to 20 minutes on each of these, present the problem, share some ideas, and then ultimately provide my recommendation that I'm building my business and my programs around. Even as imperfect and incomplete as they are, here's a starting point. So question number 1 about culture is, who weaponized woke? Question number 2 around technology is, are there arms dealers in the war for talent? So for 25 years, HR has been talking about it's a talent war, and getting talent is the most important thing, and we got to invest more in our employees, and we got to build employee value propositions and attract more employees. And there's been this whole talent war. Well, what if we just looked at that a different way? And who are the arms dealers in this war? Because I'm not sure employees are benefiting from the war at all. 3rd one, am I a one-eyed recruiter in the land of the blind? So it comes from a quote, Erasmus, I think is how you pronounce the name, which the original saying was, am I the one-eyed the one-eyed man in the kingdom of the blind? And what humility can HR and people like myself have really when it comes to recruiting and interviewing and assessing and declaring, oh, here's the person who's most qualified for that job? Because it's a bit of a farce how we handle it today. I got to say, and I'll back myself up there. Fourth one, around performance management: is SMART dumb? Which it was really hard to make that a question, but I needed it to fit the 5 confronting questions model. I'm telling you, SMART is dumb, but it's always better if you frame it like a question, I guess. And then the fifth one is, what if TED Talks and TikToks aren't enough? And it's all about how learning and development and training and leadership training has shifted to a more social media driven, video driven, electronically distributed driven consumption of ideas from other people instead of actual, concrete, profound learning experiences. So those are the 5 questions. They're filled with 5 different arguments, filled with dozens of different ideas of what we could do differently, and that's what we will look to on Tuesday. And then it wraps up with the new brand for human resources and what's the new purpose of human resources moving forward in this world. So I'll leave you tonight with the ultimate question, and it's a fun one. Is HR perverted? Just think about that. I've made some arguments so far. When I get through these 5 confronting questions, we'll come back and we'll debate, is HR perverted? And if HR is perverted, just how perverted is human resources? So that's the end of the stream. Thank you so much for those who did join today, and certainly for those that will listen in the future. First time I've gone through this content. Of course, you're going to see it a million other ways as well. So Matt, thanks for joining today. And that is a wrap. Thank you, everyone.